3 cars, all supposed to change the industry, all destroyed by decisions that make absolutely no sense today. The DeLorean DMC-12, the Pontiac Fiero, the Jaguar XJ220. Not failures because they were bad ideas, failures because someone, somewhere, at exactly the wrong moment, made exactly the wrong call. And by the time anyone realized it, it was already over. This is what that looks like. Part 1. The DeLorean DMC-12. It looked like the future. It drove like the past. Picture 1981. You're standing on a city street somewhere in America, and a car rolls by that looks like it arrived from a different decade. Stainless steel body, gullwing doors that lift straight up. A silhouette so aggressive, so angular, so unlike anything else on the road, that you genuinely stop walking and stare. That car is the DeLorean DMC-12, and for about 30 seconds, before you know anything else about it, it is the most exciting thing you have ever seen on 4 wheels. Then someone hands you a review, and the number that ends everything is right there in the first paragraph. 130 horsepower. In 1981, a Corvette was making 190. A Porsche 911 SC was making around 180. The Mazda RX-7, a small, lightweight Japanese sports car, matched the DeLorean almost exactly in power and weighed nearly 500 pounds less. The car that looked like it belonged in a science fiction film needed 10.5 seconds to reach 60 miles per hour from a standstill. 10.5 seconds. In a car that looked like that. This is the gap that killed the DeLorean before it ever had a chance. Not the gullwing doors, not the stainless steel, not the price. The gap between what the car looked like it could do and what it actually did was so wide, so visible, so immediately apparent to every journalist who got behind the wheel, that no amount of visual drama could bridge it. And here's what makes it devastating. It didn't have to be that way. Decision 1. The wrong engine. John DeLorean's original plan called for a rotary engine, co-developed with Citroën. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a direction, an engine chosen with the car's character in mind. Then Citroën's financial situation collapsed. The deal fell apart, and DeLorean was left with a production timeline, an unfinished car, and no powertrain. The solution that was found was the PRV V6, a 2.85-liter unit built jointly by Peugeot, Renault, and Volvo. It was available. It was relatively affordable. It fit the rear engine layout. And in US market specification, it produced 130 horsepower. Meanwhile, competitors were doing this. Toyota was putting a twin-cam engine in the Supra. Porsche was turbocharging. BMW was releasing the M1. The performance bar, in 1981, was not low. And the DeLorean walked right under it. There were options. The Rover V8, lightweight and proven, was being used in British sports cars at the time. A turbocharged version of the PRV itself existed and was under development. People inside the company knew the engine was inadequate. But the combination of budget pressure, factory pressure, and the sheer chaos of trying to get a brand new manufacturing operation running had consumed every available resource. The car went to market anyway, underpowered, unfinished, and the press was merciless. Road and track, car and driver, motor trend. The reviews all said the same thing in different words. Spectacular to look at, deeply disappointing to drive. Build quality was inconsistent because the factory in Northern Ireland was staffed by a workforce that had no prior automotive manufacturing experience, learning on the job in real time, on cars that were going straight to paying customers. And then came the decision that would quietly kill everything else. Decision 2, the factory that couldn't carry the weight. Building the DMC 12 inches Dunmurray, on the outskirts of Belfast, wasn't purely a manufacturing decision. It was a political one. The British government, trying to bring employment to a region in the middle of one of the most violent periods of the Troubles, offered DeLorean Motor Company an extraordinary package of financial support grants and loans that totaled tens of millions of pounds. Without that money, the company might never have gotten past the drawing board. DeLorean took it. But here's what that decision actually meant in practice. Building a car factory from nothing, in a region with no automotive tradition, while simultaneously developing the car itself, managing a transatlantic company structure, and trying to establish dealer relationships across the United States. It was too many problems at once. Quality control suffered, costs overran, the timeline slipped. And by the time the DMC-12 finally reached American showrooms, the company's finances were already stretched to the breaking point. What happened next wasn't about engineering at all. In October 1982, John DeLorean was arrested in a drug trafficking sting operation run by the FBI. He was ultimately acquitted. The jury found entrapment, but the company had already entered receivership 8 months earlier. In February 1982, production stopped. Approximately 9,000 cars had been built. Just like that. The DeLorean that was supposed to change the industry was gone, not because the concept was wrong, but because the execution had been overwhelmed by decisions that no amount of brilliant design could survive. The stainless steel didn't rust. The backbone chassis was structurally sound. The gullwing doors, for all their drama, worked. Engineers who looked at the car after the company collapsed believed that with a proper engine, something in the 200 horsepower range, and another development cycle, the DMC-12 could have genuinely competed, could have been something. Instead, it became an icon of a very different kind. The car that looked like the future and drove like the past. Part 2. The Pontiac Fiero. They fixed it, then they killed it. In 1984, General Motors did something that surprised almost everyone. They built a mid-engine sports car and sold it through Pontiac dealerships for under $10,000. The Fiero looked right. Plastic body panels over a space frame structure, genuinely innovative for a mainstream American production car at the time. 2 seats, mid-engine layout, sharp, clean lines, and a price that put it within reach of people who had never seriously considered owning a sports car before. The response was immediate. Pontiac sold over 136,000 Fieros in the first model year. Waiting lists at dealerships. Real excitement. The sense that GM had finally done something genuinely interesting. And then the decisions happened. Decision 1. The wrong engine, again. The base engine in the 1984 Pontiac Fiero was the 2.5-liter, 4-cylinder unit known internally at GM as the Iron Duke. It produced 92 horsepower. 92 horsepower. In a mid-engine sports car that had been marketed with imagery suggesting something considerably more dramatic was happening under that rear clamshell. Here's the context that makes this decision almost impossible to understand. In 1984, the Mazda RX-7 was making 135 horsepower. The Toyota MR2, the Fiero's most direct competitor, also launched in 1984, was making 83 horsepower, but in a car that weighed significantly less and handled with genuine precision. The Fiero's weight-to-power ratio was not competitive. And the Iron Duke wasn't just underpowered, it was wrong for this application in ways that went deeper than the numbers. The engine had been designed for front-wheel drive economy cars, the Chevrolet Citation, the Pontiac Phoenix. It was heavy for its output. It vibrated. It ran out of breath well before the driving got interesting. Why was it in a sports car? Budget. GM's financial planners had concluded that the only way the Fiero made economic sense was to maximize the use of existing, already tooled components. The Iron Duke was available. Using it saved tens of millions of dollars in development costs. What it also did was guarantee that every automotive journalist who drove a 1984 Fiero would write some version of the same sentence. This is not the sports car it pretends to be. The buyers came anyway. 136,000 of them. But the foundation had been cracked before a single car left the assembly line. Decision 2. The fire. Pontiac issues a recall covering approximately 260,000 Fieros. The problem: engine fires. The Iron Duke, in the specific environment of the Fiero's rear engine bay, had a tendency toward oil consumption issues that, in the worst cases, led to oil leaking onto hot exhaust components. Cars burned, not occasionally hundreds of confirmed incidents. The NHTSA was involved. The press coverage was exactly as bad as you'd expect. No deaths were officially attributed to the fires, but in the court of public opinion, Pontiac Fiero and Catches Fire were now the same sentence. For a sports car, a car people buy with emotion, with identity, with the desire to feel something that association was close to unsurvivable. And here is the brutal irony. By the time the recall happened, Pontiac was already fixing the car. The 1986 GT had brought a 2.8-liter V6, making 140 horsepower, not electrifying but real, meaningful. The suspension had been revised. The handling, which had always been limited by components borrowed from economy car platforms, was improving with each model year. Journalists, who drove the 1987 Fiero, were writing things like, "This is finally becoming what it always claimed to be." The car was getting there, and then came the decision that ensured none of it would matter. Decision 3, cancelled at the moment of arrival. The 1988 Pontiac Fiero is, by almost universal agreement among people who drove one, the car that the Fiero should have been in 1984. Revised suspension geometry. The V6 as the headline engine, a significantly improved chassis that delivered the driving dynamics the original had only hinted at. There was a new body in development, smoother, more aerodynamic. Credible internal discussions about a more powerful engine option. The Fiero, 4 years into its life, was finally working. General Motors cancelled it in August 1988. The official reasoning: sales had fallen from 136,000 inches, 1,984, to approximately 26,000 for the 1988 model year. The fire scandal had done its damage. The broader cost-cutting environment inside GM in the late 80s was real, and the Fiero was a relatively low-volume product that required its own dedicated platform and manufacturing resources. The internal logic existed, but so did this reality. The car that GM cancelled in 1988 was not the car that had the engine fires. It was not the car that had disappointed the reviewers in 1984. It was a genuinely good mid-engine sports car that had taken 4 years to become what it had always promised to be. The tooling was destroyed after cancellation. Think about that for a moment. The moment the Fiero finally worked, it ceased to exist. And with it went all the development investment, all the lessons learned, all the engineering progress that 4 years of iteration had produced. They fixed it, then they killed it. If that isn't a tragedy in the most exact sense of the word, it's hard to know what is. Part 3. The Jaguar XJ220. Sold one car, delivered another. October 1988, Birmingham Motor Show. The Jaguar XJ220 concept is unveiled, and the crowd does something unusual for a motor show. They stop, not the polite attention that greets a new sedan or a refreshed estate car. Real, genuine, physical stopping. People pressing forward. People photographing from every angle. Industry veterans, people who had seen everything, standing in front of this car with expressions of unguarded astonishment. Because it warranted that response. The XJ220 was massive and low and breathtaking. Designer Keith Helfet had created bodywork that looked like something between a racing prototype and a sculpture, a shape so resolved, so utterly confident, that it seemed impossible that it had come from a committee. Under the hood, the concept carried a V12 engine, all-wheel drive, a claimed top speed that would make it the fastest production car on Earth. Jaguar received so many serious inquiries from potential buyers that they decided to actually build it. Deposits came in from around the world. The price was set at £361,000. Nearly 1,500 people committed money. Production was planned for 350 examples. And then came the decision that changed everything. Decision 1. A different car. The XJ220 that arrived in customer hands in 1992 had a twin turbocharged V6 engine, displacing 3.5 liters. The V12, gone. The all-wheel drive, gone. Now, and this matters, the engineering story here is not straightforward. The V6 that replaced the V12 was not a compromise in the conventional sense. It was derived from the power plant developed for the Metro 6R4, Jaguar's Group B rally car. It was a sophisticated, purpose-built racing engine developed by a serious team of engineers. In the XJ220, it produced approximately 542 horsepower. The car would eventually run to 212.3 miles per hour at the Nardo circuit in 1992, making it the fastest production car in the world at that time. The engineers who built it were proud of it, with genuine reason. But here is the problem that no amount of engineering excellence could solve. The people who had paid deposits had been shown something else. They had seen a V12. They had seen all-wheel drive. They had written checks based on that image. And when Jaguar revealed the production specification, they found out largely without warning, largely without the kind of communication that might have explained the rationale and built excitement for a car that was, in many ways, technically superior to the concept that they were getting a fundamentally different machine. The lawsuits began almost immediately. Groups of deposit holders launched legal action against Jaguar, arguing that the production car was materially different from what they had been sold. The legal documents had given Jaguar flexibility over the final specification. The company had, technically, reserved the right to make changes. But technical legal protection and a furious customer base are two entirely different problems. And then the world changed. Decision 2. The wrong moment in history. In August 1990, Iraq invaded Kuwait. The Gulf War that followed sent Western economies into recession. By 1991 and 1992, the supercar market, which had been extraordinary through the late 80s, with prices for exotic machinery reaching levels that made no rational sense, had collapsed. Cars that had been treated as appreciating investments a year earlier were sitting unsold. People who had signed up for the XJ220 when money felt infinite were now looking at very different financial realities. Deposit holders who might have been thrilled to take delivery were desperately trying to exit their contracts. Jaguar held firm on the contracts in many cases, and so the perception hardened. A company forcing unwilling buyers to take delivery or to forfeit six-figure deposits of a car that was already different from what they'd ordered, in a market that had turned against everything the XJ220 represented. That story ran in the press for years. By the time production ended in 1994, Jaguar had built 281 of the planned 350 cars. Secondary market values had, for some examples, fallen to less than half the original purchase price. People who had bought these cars as investments had lost extraordinary amounts of money. The XJ220, the fastest production car in the world, was being discussed almost entirely in the context of lawsuits, broken promises, and financial loss. Decision 3. The failure to communicate. Here is the version of the XJ220 story that the engineers would tell you. The V12 was too heavy. It would have compromised the car's weight distribution. The all-wheel drive was unnecessary. The XJ220's balance and chassis were capable of handling the power through the rear wheels alone. The twin-turbo V6 was lighter, more powerful relative to its weight, and ultimately made the XJ220 a better, faster, more focused driver's car than the original concept would have been. That argument is not wrong. But Jaguar never effectively made it, not to the people who mattered most, not to the deposit holders who had committed hundreds of thousands of pounds to a specific vision of what this car was, not to the press that was covering the story, not to the public that was watching from the outside. What should have been announced as, "We made this car better, and here's why," arrived instead as a revelation, a shock that felt, to everyone who experienced it, like a bait and switch. The communication failure was not a minor procedural error. In the context of a collapsing luxury market, a furious customer base, and a press pack looking for exactly this kind of story, it was catastrophic. The XJ220 never got a fair chance to be judged on its actual merits. And its actual merits, the 212 miles per hour's top speed, the ferocious turbocharged V6, the extraordinary chassis were real. They were considerable. This was a genuinely spectacular machine. It just never got to live in that story. Instead, it lived in a different one, and that story destroyed it. The truth about perfect failures. 3 cars, 3 different eras, 3 different countries, 3 completely different engineering philosophies. And the same story. Not the story of bad ideas. Not the story of lazy engineering or careless design or absence of vision. The story of good ideas, extraordinary ideas meeting the specific, identifiable, preventable decisions that ended them. The DeLorean arrived with the wrong engine in a car that deserved the right one. Then the company collapsed, before any of it could be fixed. The Fiero was compromised at birth by a budget decision, nearly destroyed by the consequences, systematically repaired by engineers who believed in it, and cancelled the moment it finally worked. The XJ220 was shown to the world as one thing and delivered as something different, without the communication that might have changed everything, at the worst possible economic moment. None of these were inevitable. That's what stays with you when you look at the histories closely. At almost every turning point, there was another choice available. A different engine, a different conversation with your customers. A decision to keep funding something that was finally getting it right. The choices that were made instead were not made by villains. They were made by people under pressure, financial pressure, time pressure, market pressure, who chose the solution that seemed most manageable in the immediate term. And the immediate term cost them everything. Because the truth is, the biggest failures in the auto industry were never bad ideas. They were good ideas, extraordinary ideas, destroyed by small decisions made in moments of pressure by people who didn't realize that those decisions would become the entire story. And decades later, standing in front of a stainless steel DeLorean at a car show, or watching a Fiero V6 at a track day, or seeing an XJ220 at auction selling for more money than it ever sold for new, that's what you're actually looking at. Not a failure. The ghost of what it should have been. And if you were there, if you saw any of these cars when they were new, if you stood next to a DeLorean in a showroom, if you ever rode in a Fiero, if you watched the XJ220 appear on the cover of a magazine and felt something I want to know about it, drop it in the comments. Your story, your memory, what you thought when you first saw one of these cars. Whether you think these decisions were as catastrophic as they look in hindsight, or whether you'd defend any of them. That conversation is exactly why this channel exists. And if this kind of story is what you come here for, real history, real machines, real consequences, then make sure you're subscribed, because there are more stories like this one. Cars that should have changed everything. Decisions that made sure they didn't. We'll see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.